There are stories that have lived for more than 2,000 years, yet every time they are told, they still leave the listener in silence. Not because they hold supernatural miracles. A prince was born into luxury, protection, and high expectations. From the moment of his birth, it was believed his destiny had been foretold. To become either a great ruler who would conquer the world, or a wise sage who would guide humanity. But no one imagined the path he would choose, a journey that would lead him away from power, of moments when all seemed lost, and of choices powerful enough to change the course of human history. This journey began with a child who had never seen suffering, until the day he confronted the harsh realities of life. From a prince surrounded by palaces of splendor, to a wanderer with no home, with only the stars above and the earth beneath as his companions. Dissolved, he had found the answer to the timeless question, and from that moment, the world would never be the same. But this is not just a story of long ago. In every century, every culture, every life, there comes a time when we stand at a crossroads, just as Prince Siddhartha once did. We may differ in language, skin color, and beliefs, but our deepest questions about happiness, meaning, in the heart of one human being. The Life Journey of Gautama Buddha. Part 1. Introduction. Reflecting on the life of an enlightened one. 500 years. More than 2.5 millennia have passed since a man named Siddhartha Gautama sat beneath the Bodhi tree and awakened. Yet the story of his life still carries an extraordinary vitality. It transcends time, borders, languages, and even religious differences. It is told in the villages of India, along the bustling streets of Tokyo, in the quiet meditation halls of Europe, and even in the noisy cities of the modern West. Regardless of birth, wealth, or era, we all share the same yearning, to be happy and free from suffering. He did not merely explain the path through theory. He walked it fully, stumbled, stood up, and attained awakening. This path, when retold, becomes a reminder that peace is not something distant, but a real possibility within every heart. Furthermore, the Buddha's teachings are not bound by time. When he spoke of compassion, of letting go of anger, of facing loss, these truths remain as relevant in the 21st century as they were in ancient India. In a modern world of workplace pressures and the noise of social media, his words still offer a space to pause and breathe. For those lost in personal crises, no one is forever bound by fate or circumstance. If a prince can become an enlightened being, then each of us has the potential to change our lives, if we have the determination and wisdom to do so. Looking back on this journey, we realize that its emotional resonance does not come from distance, but from closeness. It does not push us away, it draws us nearer to ourselves. It stirs the questions we have always carried in our hearts, but never dared to face. And when we dare to face them, we are already taking our first steps on the same path the Buddha once walked. That is why, after more than 2,500 years, his life still holds the power to move us. It is a reminder that amid all the world's changes, there are values and truths that never fade. And perhaps, in listening to his story, each of us is also beginning a new journey. The journey of rediscovering the peace that has always been within us. 1. Coexisted, often clashing in battle, yet trading vigorously. Along the dusty red roads connecting its cities, caravans bustled past, carrying spices, textiles, gemstones, and tales from faraway lands. And were still being pursued with fervor. Society in ancient India operated under a rigid caste system known as Varna, with 4 main classes: the Brahmins, priests, and scholars; the Kshatriyas, warriors and nobility; the Vaishyas, merchants and prosperous farmers; and the Shudras, laborers and servants. One's birth into a caste was seen as a lifelong binding, with little hope of change. Those in the upper castes had access to education and knowledge, but this knowledge largely served to preserve social order and uphold elaborate religious rituals. The dominant religion at the time was rooted in the Vedas, the sacred scriptures of early Hinduism. Complex sacrificial rites, offerings to the gods, and strict adherence to caste duties were viewed as the path to blessings and liberation. Yet beneath these grand rituals, doubt began to stir. Could offerings and prayers truly touch the essence of human suffering, or were they merely external forms? These questions arose not only among the oppressed lower classes, but also among intellectuals and nobles who had encountered diverse streams of thought. Alongside the established religion, there was a rising tide of new movements. Deep meditation to enter trance-like states, or philosophical reasoning to explain the nature of existence. This was an age when some chose to abandon wealth, status, and comfort to live lives entirely devoted to meaning. The quest for truth was no longer a solitary pursuit. It had become a widespread intellectual and spiritual movement across northern India. The kingdom of Kapilavastu, where Siddhartha was born, lay at the intersection of these currents, the Brahmanical tradition of the Vedas and the ascetic Rama movement, the chanting of prayers and the debates of wandering sages. In ancient India, philosophy was not merely a subject of study, it was a way of life. Thinkers did not confine themselves to lecture halls. They traveled, engaged in public dialogues, and debated openly, unafraid to challenge or be challenged. These intellectual exchanges could last for days, drawing both commoners and royalty. The journey toward true happiness always begins with understanding the nature of suffering. The Buddha pointed out that most of the suffering in human life arises from attachment to wealth, fame, relationships, and even to the image we hold of ourselves. When we cling to something, we unknowingly place our happiness in things that are impermanent and constantly changing. But an inner capacity that can be cultivated through mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion. The Buddha did not deny the joys of life, but he emphasized that such joys are only lasting when our mind is no longer dominated by greed, fear, or comparison. When we let go of unrealistic expectations, we begin to see the simple beauty of each moment, and that is the foundation of true happiness. Modern psychology, though coming from a different framework, arrives at similar conclusions. Research in positive psychology shows that lasting happiness does not come from achieving every material goal, but from elements such as having a sense of meaning in life, deep social connections, and personal growth. Martin Seligman, founder of positive psychology, described happiness through the PERMA model: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. When compared with Buddhist teachings, the parallels are clear. Meaning in life aligns with wisdom and higher purpose. Engagement aligns with mindfulness. And healthy relationships align with compassion and virtuous conduct. Interestingly, both Buddhism and modern psychology agree that sustainable happiness requires training the mind. Buddhism calls it practice or cultivation, while modern psychology refers to it as developing emotional and cognitive skills. Mindfulness meditation, rooted in Buddhism, has now been widely adopted in psychotherapy, helping reduce stress, anxiety, and depression. Brain imaging studies have shown that regular meditation can physically change brain structures, increasing areas related to happiness and empathy. However, there is a distinction. Buddhism focuses on liberation from the entire cycle of suffering, samsara, a goal that transcends the concept of well-being in psychology. Modern psychology, by contrast, often focuses on optimizing life experience within the human lifespan. Yet, both converge on the same message. Happiness is not a destination, but a conscious way of living, nurturing good seeds in the mind every single day. Looking at the Buddha's own journey, we see a remarkable balance between profound wisdom and disciplined practice. He did not seek happiness by avoiding suffering, but by facing it directly, observing it, and understanding its full nature. This is exactly what modern psychologists also encourage. Rather than running from negative emotions, recognize them, accept them, and learn to transform them. Thus, placing traditional Buddhism and modern psychology side by side. Ultimately, the most important thing is not which system we follow, but that we actually begin walking the path. As the Buddha once said, no one can walk the path for you. You must walk it yourself. And as psychologists emphasize, lasting change only comes from consistent daily action. In the midst of a changing world, true happiness is still within reach, if we are willing to turn inward to find it. Part 2, Prince Siddhartha, A Childhood in Silk and Luxury. 2. 1. The Kingdom of Kapilavastu and the Sakya clan. Nestled on the edge of the fertile Gangetic plains, surrounded by the verdant slopes of the Himalayas, The kingdom of Kapilavastu in ancient times was a small but prosperous state with a unique position in the Indian subcontinent, though not a vast empire of great military power. Resembling an aristocratic republic in which power was shared among elders and prominent council members. They took pride in their lineage, which legend traced back to a noble branch of the Kshatriya class, born leaders and warriors in the ancient Indian social order. Though small in size, Kapilavastu possessed fertile lands and lay along important trade routes connecting it to other regions. This allowed its economy to thrive, its people to live in comfort, and its religious festivals and traditional rites to be held regularly. It was, in many ways, the perfect environment for a prince like Siddhartha to grow up surrounded by luxury and embark on a journey that would transform the course of human history. 2.2 A childhood in silk and gold. The invisible limits of the golden cage. From the moment he uttered his first cry, Prince Siddhartha lived within the absolute protection of the Kapilavastu palace. The palace was a masterpiece of splendor, with solid stone walls, intricately carved pillars, and lush gardens that bloomed with flowers in every season. Around it lay crystal-clear artificial lakes, adorned with white and pink lotuses and home to rare fish. Each morning, golden sunlight would filter through the windows, glimmering on soft silk curtains, creating a world of magnificence as if drawn from legend. Siddhartha was cared for by devoted attendants, taught by the finest tutors, and served by loyal aides who were ready to fulfill his every need. His meals were prepared from the freshest and purest ingredients, crafted into the most exquisite dishes. His garments were woven from the finest fabrics, embroidered with threads of gold and silver. Every game, every form of entertainment, was arranged so that his childhood unfolded in laughter, safety, and absolute comfort. Yet all of this also formed an invisible boundary, a golden cage built by his father, King Suddhodana, out of both love and fear. The king believed in a prophecy that declared Siddhartha would either become a great Chakravartin, a universal monarch ruling the four quarters, or renounce the throne to seek the path of liberation. To prevent the latter, the king was determined to keep his son far from any sight of suffering, sickness, aging, or death. Thus, Siddhartha's childhood, though rich beyond measure, was cut off from the realities of life outside. No sickly servant was ever allowed in his presence. No image of poverty or injustice was permitted to reach his eyes. Even when he went out for excursions, the streets were cleaned and decorated, and only smiling faces were allowed to greet him. Gradually, the palace became a world of its own, perfect, yet strangely artificial. Siddhartha grew up amidst music, grand festivities, and the admiration of all. But deep inside, but for Siddhartha, a sensitive and deeply contemplative soul, such perfection began to awaken a subtle unease. He felt as though he was viewing the world from the window of a palace, a place where all was beautiful but bounded. His eyes began to wander toward the distant fields, the roads leading out of the city, toward things that no one in the palace wanted him to see. A golden cage, no matter how splendid, is still a cage. And one day, when that invisible door opened, Siddhartha would step out, to face the truths no protection could ever conceal. 2. 3. The psychology of someone completely sheltered, a developmental psychology perspective. When we look at Prince Siddhartha's childhood from the perspective of developmental psychology, we see a rare case, a child who grew up in an environment of absolute protection, both materially and emotionally, yet was strictly limited in his ability to interact with reality. This created a psychological pattern that was both secure and fragile, a seemingly solid inner world, but one lacking the experiential foundation needed to withstand the inevitable changes and challenges of life. According to attachment theory, this fostered an outwardly secure attachment style. Siddhartha trusted stability, believing that everything would always be arranged to provide comfort. However, because he never encountered situations that required adaptation, his ability to adjust to change and regulate emotions in the face of difficulty had little chance to develop. From the perspective of Jean Piaget, famed for his theory of cognitive developmental stages, Siddhartha's childhood can be seen as a prolonged phase of assimilation with a lack of accommodation. New experiences were always arranged to fit into the safe patterns he already knew, rather than forcing him to adjust his understanding to face entirely new situations. In such a setting, a child may develop intelligence, aesthetic sense, and social skills that meet the standards of a luxurious environment, but remain untouched by other aspects of life, such as injustice, suffering, illness, and death. As a result, when entering the real world, the psychological shock would be far greater than for those who had been prepared from an early age. Another interesting angle comes from Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. From an early age, Siddhartha had all his basic needs met: physiological, safety, belonging, and even esteem. This allowed him to naturally have space to reach for the highest level of need, self-actualization. Yet here lies a paradox. When the lower needs are met too easily, this resilience functions like an immune system for the soul. It is formed through challenges, failures, and the process of learning to rise again after being hurt. But in Siddhartha's case, such collisions were completely removed. Every door to life's harsher realities was deliberately locked, carefully shielding him from any potential risk. Yet, this absolute protection planted another seed, the seed of a deep longing for understanding and discovery. When one has never seen darkness, the light in front of them can lose its wonder. Something deeper, even if it means stepping into uncertainty. For an ordinary person, a golden cage might seem like an extravagant dream. But for Siddhartha, a sensitive spirit with a sharp mind, it became a stifling space. There, every ray of sunlight filtering through the palace windows illuminated not only the palace's splendor, but also an unspoken question. Is this all there is? And from that very contradiction, between absolute protection and the yearning for absolute freedom, a great journey began to take shape. Though at this stage it was still just a small spark in the heart of the young prince. Part 3. Signs of Awakening. 3. The responsibility of raising a small, vulnerable life and protecting it from all the suffering of the world. This awareness stirred in him a deep question about the nature of happiness, whether safety and abundance alone could truly shield one from suffering. Yet it also drove him to seek an answer deep enough to free not only himself, but also those he loved from the endless cycle of suffering. Foreshadowing a turning point no one in the palace, not even Yasodhara, could foresee. 3.2 The 4 Journeys Beyond the Palace Walls. Encounters with birth, aging, sickness, and death. From the day he was born, Siddhartha lived in the absolute shelter of the Kapilavastu Palace. King Suddhodana, wishing to shield his son from every trace of suffering, had ordered that no harsh image of life be shown to him. Yet, like a seed hidden deep in the soil, Siddhartha's yearning to see the outside world gradually grew. One day, as an adult, he requested permission from his father to venture beyond the palace gates. What seemed like a simple outing would become a turning point that shaped the entire course of his spiritual journey. On his first excursion, Siddhartha left through the eastern gate with his charioteer, Channa. The streets of Kapilavastu unfolded before him, bustling with activity, yet mingled with sights he had never known. At a street corner, he saw an old man, back bent, hair white, skin wrinkled, walking unsteadily with a cane. His face bore the deep lines of passing years. Siddhartha had never witnessed such a sight before. He turned to Channa, who explained for the first time the reality of old age, a stage no one could escape. Channa told him that everyone, even a prince, would eventually grow weak and frail. In that moment, a small crack formed in the protective wall that the palace had built around him. The second journey took Siddhartha through the southern gate. There, he encountered a sick man lying curled up by the roadside. His face was pale, his breath labored, his body thin as though only skin and bone remained. The man groaned in pain, and no one could bear his suffering for him. Siddhartha asked Channa, "What has made him this way?" He learned about illness, a misery that could strike anyone, regardless of wealth or status. This time, Siddhartha's heart was filled not only with curiosity, but also with a profound unease. If even health, something he had always taken for granted, could be lost, then what in life was truly secure? The third journey took them westward. On a narrow road, Siddhartha saw a funeral procession. Channa explained that this was death, the inevitable end of every human life. Siddhartha was silent for a long time. He realized that death came not only to the elderly or the sick, but could strike anyone at any time. The fragility of life suddenly made the pleasures of the palace feel fleeting and hollow. On the fourth journey, a different image appeared before him. This time, Siddhartha met a wandering ascetic, serene in bearing, face calm, clad in a simple saffron robe, walking slowly yet firmly. In stark contrast to the suffering of the previous encounters, this man radiated a deep stillness, as though he was no longer bound by life's imperfections. Channa explained that he was one who had renounced worldly life, seeking a path to liberation from suffering, freedom from the endless cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. These 4 excursions shook the very foundations of the world Siddhartha had known. He saw clearly that everyone, even the most privileged, must face life's inescapable laws, to be born, to grow old, to fall ill, and to die. The palace, with all its grandeur, could not protect him or anyone from these realities. From that point, a great question arose in his heart. If birth, aging, sickness, and death are inevitable, is there a way to break free from this binding cycle? The image of the peaceful ascetic became a faint, yet guiding light in his mind. Though he did not yet know the answer, Siddhartha could feel the stirring of a deep inner call, the call to seek, the call to true freedom. And he knew that one day, he would have to leave the palace to follow that path. 3. The psychological impact of the 4 sights on someone who has never faced suffering. For most people, exposure to life's harsher realities, aging, illness, and death, happens gradually over time, giving the mind a chance to adjust. But for Siddhartha, these 4 encounters came like sudden blows to the soul, shattering the entire framework of belief that had been nurtured inside the golden cage of the palace. From childhood, he had been surrounded only by beauty, vitality, and abundance. The 4 excursions outside the city were not merely 4 separate glimpses of different scenes. They were 4 arrows piercing the veil of illusion. On the first, the image of the old man made Siddhartha realize that youth, a thing he had never questioned, was only temporary. Aging was not a choice but a law. This realization opened a new door. But behind it was a vast darkness. If a healthy, vibrant body could one day stoop and tremble, was there anything in life that would not change? On the second, seeing the sick man, the shock shifted into deep unease. Illness did not only ravage the body, it could sap one's will, reducing a person to helplessness in even the most basic acts, such as eating or breathing. For someone who had never even caught a cold, never witnessed a loved one writhing in pain, this was a jarring awakening. Siddhartha began to sense that the foundation of safety he had trusted all his life was in fact a fragile shell. On the third, death appeared, unvarnished and unsoftened. A lifeless body. The cries of mourners, the silence of the one in the coffin, all of it made Siddhartha understand that the ultimate end of every life's journey was cessation. This truth, though obvious, cut through his ties to palace pleasures and ambitions. If everything was to be lost in the end, what was the true meaning of living? And then came the 4th sight, the serene figure of an ascetic. While the first 3 scenes evoked helplessness and fear, this one offered a counterpoint, a way of facing suffering without being consumed by it. The monk was not just a seeker of truth, but a symbol of escape from the cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. The impact here was not a shock, but a ray of hope in the midst of darkness. A hint of an answer to the questions now stirring within him. From the perspective of developmental psychology, the 4 sights not only shifted his perception in the moment, but also planted a seed of unrest. Yet it was the kind of unrest that drives one toward creative search, toward deeper answers. From this point on, doubt about the value of power, beauty, and pleasure began to grow. The vague urge to leave the palace, once only a faint feeling, had now become an irreversible direction. The deepest psychological impact was Siddhartha's realization of the fragility of everything humans cling to. The sights of aging, illness, and death revealed the truth of impermanence. The image of the ascetic awakened the belief that there might be a way beyond these limits. Within him, these 2 opposing poles, despair and hope, merged. creating the force strong enough to push him onto a path no one in his royal lineage had ever dared to walk. Part 4. The decision to leave the palace. 4. 1. The night of departure. The conflict between duty and the call within. That night, the city of Kapilavastu lay under a deep stillness. The sky was covered with countless stars. Yet inside the palace, Prince Siddhartha's mind was a turbulent sea. This was not a decision born in a single moment, but the culmination of months of contemplation, inner struggle. Everything that had once been a source of pride, power, wealth, fame, the warm love of Princess Yasodhara, and the innocent smile of Rahula, had now become invisible threads that both uplifted and bound his heart. The call within him grew louder each day. To find a path that could free humanity from the endless cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Yet, at the same time, the voice of duty echoed just as strongly. He was a prince, a son, a husband, and a father. On one side lay the bonds of love, responsibility, and belonging. On the other, an expansive ideal and the beckoning of a truth still unseen. In his mind, these two currents collided and intertwined, making every moment heavy with indecision. In the nights leading up to that fateful evening, Siddhartha had often wandered the palace corridors while everyone else slept. He would gaze at Yasodhara cradling Rahula in her arms, her face serene, as if no storm could ever reach them. That image was both a source of warmth and a blade twisting in his heart. He knew that once he stepped beyond the palace gates that night, he would be leaving all of it behind, not merely creating distance, but leaving an unfillable emptiness. The horse Kanthaka stood ready. His loyal attendant Channa had prepared everything, though his eyes betrayed a deep unease. Channa understood this was not a mere outing. It was the beginning of a journey with no return. Siddhartha gently laid his hand on the horse's mane, feeling the warm breath against his palm, a silent farewell between two beings long bound by loyalty and affection. In the saddle, Siddhartha turned to look at the palace one last time. The moonlight poured over the gleaming rooftops, etching a beauty so tranquil it seemed eternal. Yet he knew that behind this splendor lay the fragile truth of human existence. He was not leaving to escape, but to seek a path that could save both himself and those he loved from the slow erosion of impermanence. The sound of hooves echoed rhythmically on the dark road leading to the city gates. Each beat was like a pounding heart, urging him forward, yet heavy with sorrow. Channa walked beside him in silence, his eyes fixed on every movement of his master. At the northern gate, the guards were asleep. This was a moment unseen by the world, a departure without drums, without farewells. To the state of mind of one who leaves everything behind in search of truth. Stepping out of the palace, Siddhartha felt as though he had crossed into an entirely different world. The cold night wind pierced through his coarse robe, carrying the scent of damp earth, wild grass, and the untamed breath of nature, things he had never truly experienced within the fortress walls. Siddhartha felt both light and heavy. Light for having escaped the soft yet confining embrace of the palace. Heavy because he knew that behind him were those who would awaken to pain when they realized he had gone. He understood well that this departure was not a leisurely journey. It was the deepest kind of farewell, not only to certain people, but to his own status, position, and the safety in which he had been nurtured since birth. Confronted by the darkness. The story of Prince Siddhartha, who left everything behind to seek the truth, is a prime example. Although it happened more than 2 millennia ago, it reflects with striking clarity the nature of the existential crisis that many people face today. A common feature is the collision between reality and questions of meaning. When Siddhartha witnessed the 4 sights, birth, aging, sickness, and death, the world he knew, wrapped in luxury and the illusion of permanence, began to crack. In modern psychology, this is called cognitive dissonance, the moment when old beliefs can no longer explain one's lived experience. For someone who had never encountered suffering, though in different forms, it may happen when a young person achieves every career goal yet still feels empty, when a wealthy person realizes that money cannot save a loved one from illness, or when an unexpected event, such as losing a job, a divorce, or a pandemic, renders all of life's plans meaningless. In all these cases, the same question begins to echo. An existential crisis often comes with the collapse of the ideal self, the image of oneself once believed to be the ultimate goal. For Siddhartha, the ideal self that his father envisioned for him was that of a kind and powerful king, ruling a prosperous and peaceful kingdom. Existential psychologists such as Viktor Frankl and Rollo may suggest that an existential crisis is not a sign of pathology, but a potential turning point. It forces a person to confront fundamental questions: what truly matters, and which values are worth living for. For Siddhartha, the answers could not be found in lavish banquets or courtly entertainments, but only through personal experience and a direct exploration of life's nature. This is why he chose to leave the palace, a decision that, in modern terms, could be seen as a conscious choice to rebuild the self based on a new sense of meaning. Another striking aspect is that an existential crisis often comes with a profound loneliness. These questions are not ones that everyone is ready to face, for the matters that troubled him were beyond the scope of family affection or political duty. In the modern world, a similar loneliness is common among those seeking new meaning in life when they realize they no longer fit into the value system of the community around them. From a Buddhist perspective, for Siddhartha, the existential crisis was not just a psychological state. It was the greatest driving force behind his journey into the unknown, where there were no titles, no protection, only a burning aspiration to find the truth. For the modern person, understanding the nature of this crisis can also help reduce the fear when it comes, instead of avoiding it. A master famed for his meditative practice leading to the deep state known as the sphere of nothingness, where the mind no longer clings to anything at all. Siddhartha quickly absorbed the teachings and practiced diligently, reaching the same level as his teacher in a short time. Yet, instead of feeling satisfied, he realized that this state, though tranquil and vast, still did not answer the fundamental question, the cause and cessation of suffering. In his heart, the answer remained undiscovered. Not stopping there, Siddhartha went to a second teacher, Uddaka Ramaputta, who taught the meditation of the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. From a modern perspective, Siddhartha's experience could be compared to that of a brilliant scholar who has absorbed knowledge from the greatest minds, only to realize that theory and secondhand experience are not enough to touch reality. Books can open the doors of awareness, but crossing that threshold is a task for each individual alone. In psychology, this is the shift from knowing about descriptive knowledge to knowing by being experiential knowledge. Looking back, we can see Siddhartha's humility and determination in this period. He did not reject the value of what he had learned. Rather, he regarded it as a foundation, necessary stepping stones. Yet he refused to be bound by the prestige or authority of his teachers. When he saw the limits, he was willing to walk away, even if it meant stepping again into the unknown, without any guarantees. It is in this attitude, deeply respecting the wisdom of predecessors, yet daring to go beyond it, that the strength of a true seeker is revealed. It is a reminder that in the spiritual journey, or in any area of life, one must learn wholeheartedly, but never forget that the final step must be taken by oneself. And sometimes, as Siddhartha did, this means leaving behind even the best of what we have attained to search for a new path, not knowing exactly where it will lead. 5. 6 years of asceticism in the forest, the power and the trap of extremes. After leaving the contemporary spiritual teachers, Siddhartha entered a new phase of his quest for truth, a period remembered in both history and legend with a mix of reverence and unease. 6 years of extreme asceticism in the deep forest. Sit motionless through the cold night, or hold his breath for extended periods in an attempt to control life itself, applying every severe method to its highest degree. Those years demonstrated the extraordinary strength of human will. No one could deny Siddhartha's perseverance, discipline, and steadfastness, far beyond that of ordinary men. Yet at the same time, but a necessary condition for the mind to dwell in stillness and penetrate the truth. In that moment, a new door opened. He understood that the path he sought lay neither in indulgence of the senses nor in the extreme of self-denial, but in the middle way, avoiding both ends of excess. This realization was not merely a shift in practice, but a major step forward in humanity's spiritual thinking, Liberation is not the product of destroying the body or suppressing all emotions, but of awakening beyond both suffering and pleasure. From a modern perspective, those 6 years of asceticism reflect a phenomenon still seen today. People pursuing extreme methods with the unshakable belief that if they endure enough, sacrifice enough, they will inevitably reach their goal. Yet often, Siddhartha emerged with a new conviction that the middle way would lead him to the ultimate truth. Those 6 years were not wasted, but rather a trial by fire. 3. Why austerities do not lead to enlightenment. A Buddhist and neuroscientific perspective. In the history of human thought, asceticism has often been seen as the fastest way to purify the soul. From the ancient Indian sadhus to the Stoics of the West to the ascetics of many religions, the common thread is the self-imposition of harsh limits on the body. With the belief that when the body is tormented and desire is eradicated, the mind will reach perfect purity. Yet the story of Prince Siddhartha, who underwent 6 years of extreme austerities without finding the answer, is clear evidence that asceticism, however holy it may seem, does not necessarily lead to enlightenment. From a Buddhist perspective, the root reason is this: asceticism is a form of extremism, and all extremes are a kind of clinging, upadana. In the Majjhima Nikaya, middle-length discourses, the Buddha repeatedly mentioned 2 extremes that practitioners must avoid. One is indulgence in sensual pleasures, the other is self-mortification. Both stem from the mistaken notion that happiness or liberation lies in an external condition, either in fully satisfying desires or in fully eliminating them. From the perspective of modern neuroscience, the reason extreme asceticism does not lead to liberating wisdom becomes even clearer. The human brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, requires a stable supply of energy to maintain higher cognitive functions, reasoning, self-reflection, and especially the ability to detect deep psychological patterns. When the body is subjected to prolonged starvation, blood glucose drops sharply. The sympathetic nervous system remains activated, keeping the body in a constant fight-or-flight state. In such a state, the brain prioritizes survival responses over abstract thought or deep introspection. In other words, extreme austerities do not expand consciousness, but narrow it down to primal reactions. From both perspectives, Buddhist and scientific, it is clear that asceticism ultimately revolves around the body and manipulations upon it. But enlightenment, according to the Buddha, is not a mere physical phenomenon. It is the complete transformation of the mind, breaking through ignorance, eradicating greed, hatred, and delusion, and realizing the impermanence and selfless nature of all phenomena. The body is only part of that process and cannot be the sole gateway to liberation. Thus, when Siddhartha abandoned asceticism, it was not failure or giving up, but a critical turning point. The realization of the middle way, Majjhima Path, a path that leans neither toward indulgence nor toward self-mortification. This decision shows that discernment and the courage to abandon mistakes are more important than blind perseverance. Even today, many people unconsciously practice modern versions of asceticism, forcing themselves into extreme diets, training to the point of exhaustion, or working to the detriment of their health, believing that bodily sacrifice will bring success or awakening. We merely exchange one form of bondage for another, more subtle, but still a prison. Asceticism, therefore, is not wholly wrong. It can cultivate perseverance and endurance. But if we take it as the ultimate goal, we will remain trapped in the whirlpool of extremes, never reaching the shore of true freedom. Enlightenment lies not in how much the body can endure. There are stories that have lived for more than 2,000 years, yet every time they are told, they still leave the listener in silence. Not because they hold supernatural miracles. A prince was born into luxury, protection, and high expectations. From the moment of his birth, it was believed his destiny had been foretold. To become either a great ruler who would conquer the world, or a wise sage who would guide humanity. But no one imagined the path he would choose, a journey that would lead him away from power, of moments when all seemed lost, and of choices powerful enough to change the course of human history. This journey began with a child who had never seen suffering, until the day he confronted the harsh realities of life. From a prince surrounded by palaces of splendor to a wanderer with no home, with only the stars above and the earth beneath as his companions. Dissolved, he had found the answer to the timeless question, and from that moment, the world would never be the same. But this is not just a story of long ago. In every century, every culture, every life, there comes a time when we stand at a crossroads, just as Prince Siddhartha once did. We may differ in language, skin color, and beliefs, but our deepest questions about happiness, meaning, in the heart of one human being. The Life Journey of Gautama Buddha. Part 1. Introduction. Reflecting on the life of an enlightened one. 1. 500 years. More than 2.5 millennia have passed since a man named Siddhartha Gautama sat beneath the Bodhi tree and awakened. Yet the story of his life still carries an extraordinary vitality.